Since there's just the three of us, how about we divvy up roles this way?
Mhm.
Rob, do you mind being the liturgist?
Not at all.
And then Miller, if you could be voice of the people,
Sure.
that would be super.
I
Um,
have Facebook up, but I don't see us on. There we go. I just
yeah,
refreshed it again. There we are.
yeah, just starting. So you see, I'm also checking on YouTube. So, well, it's showing that's not right. Pardon me just a moment. Interesting. There we go. All right. So, well, welcome, and if you're, oh, and welcome to those of you who are streaming. Thanks for joining us for worship today. Um, all right, so we got our roles assigned. Let's see. Let me go ahead and share up the liturgy, and we can get started. Oh, I didn't say. I guess, um, Rob, you're doing the. If you're doing liturgy, then how about Miller? Do you mind doing the Hebrew Bible reading?
Sure.
And I will do the New Testament reading. That sound good? All right, let's go with that. Here, I'll share that up on the screen and when y'all are ready.
All right. Today in 1456, at a retrial demanded by her family, Joan of Arc was acquitted of the charges of heresy for which she had been put to death 25 years earlier. On today's date in 1911, the United States, Japan, Russia, and the United Kingdom signed an agreement ending open water seal hunting. This was the first such international treaty signed to preserve wildlife. Today in 2017, 122 countries signed the International Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons in New York. None of the countries who currently have nuclear weapons, including the United States and Russia, signed it, but the document reflects an overwhelming consensus by the rest of humankind to reject the threat of nuclear war. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
As beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
draw near and let us break the bread of life.
Today's responsive reading comes from Psalm 123. I raise my eyes to you, you who rule heaven.
Just as the eyes of servants attend to their master's hand,
Just as the eyes of a female servant attend to her mistress' hand.
that's how our eyes attend to the Holy One, our God, until she has mercy on us.
Have mercy on us, Lord. Have mercy.
Because we've had more than enough shame.
We've had more than enough mockery from the self confident.
More than enough shame from the proud. Today's Hebrew Bible reading comes from Ezekiel 2 1 through 5. The voice said to me, Human one, stand on your feet, and I'll speak to you. As he spoke to me, a wind came to me and stood me on my feet, and I heard someone addressing me. He said to me, Human one, I'm sending you to the Israelites, a traitorous and rebellious people. They and their ancestors have been rebelling against me to this very day. I'm sending you to their hard-headed and hard-hearted descendants. And you will say to them, The Lord God proclaims, whether they listen or whether they refuse, since they are a household of rebels, they will know that a prophet has been among them.
Our New Testament reading is from Mark chapter 6, verses 1 through 13. Jesus left that place and came to his hometown. His disciples followed him. On the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue. Many who heard him were surprised. Where did this man get all this? What's this wisdom he's been given? What about the powerful acts accomplished through him? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't he Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us?" They were repulsed by him and fell into sin. Jesus said to them, "Prophets are honored everywhere except in their hometowns, among their relatives, and in their own households." He was unable to do any miracles there, except that he placed his hands on a few sick people and healed them. He was appalled by their disbelief. Then Jesus traveled through the surrounding villages teaching. He called for the 12 and sent them out in pairs. He gave them authority over unclean spirits. He instructed them to take nothing for the journey except a walking stick, no bread, no bags, and no money in their belts. He told them to wear sandals, but not to put on 2 shirts. He said, "Whatever house you enter, remain there until you leave that place. If a place doesn't welcome you or listen to you, as you leave, shake the dust off your feet as a witness against them." So they went out and proclaimed that people should change their hearts and lives. They cast out many demons, and they anointed many sick people with olive oil and healed them. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
Mark Twain wrote of Joan of Arc. She was truthful when lying was the common speech of men. She was honest when honesty was become a lost virtue. She was a keeper of promises when the keeping of a promise was expected of no one. She was full of pity when merciless cruelty was the rule. She was steadfast when stability was unknown, and honorable in an age which had forgotten what honor was. She was a rock of convictions in a time when men believed in nothing and scoffed at all things. She was unfailingly true in an age that was false to the core. She was of a dauntless courage when hope and courage had perished in the hearts of her nation.
So thank you all for getting us started with worship today. And thank you to those of you who are streaming, who are tuning in on YouTube or Facebook. If you're streaming, if you wouldn't mind clicking like or just mention where you're watching from, that gives us a way to count your presence with us today. We'll go to God in time of prayer. I'll get us started. And if you would like to lift up a prayer concern of your own, if you're streaming, feel free to put it in the comments. Or if you're in Zoom, put it in the chat. Let's go to God in prayer. Gracious God, who sends us prophets and seers, visionaries and wisdom keepers, shamans and spiritual leaders, gurus, saviors. We are always looking out for the next prophet or person of wisdom to help bring us a word of reason and insight into a world and an age that seem completely out of control. We thank you that you do send such people, but we're also aware of how often we miss them. Help us to have open ears, to listen carefully. Help us to listen from sources of wisdom that we might overlook. Help us to hear wisdom and mercy and grace in the language of the bees, of the rivers, of the natural world, and of our own hearts. We admit that we often fail to listen to wisdom, and we often act in cruelty and anger rather than with pity and forgiveness. We recognize that we do this as both as individuals and as communities. God, we ask for your insight and wisdom for leaders and for the people who follow them. We ask for transformation of our own hearts, of our communities, and of our world. We lift up to you all those places where hope seems far off, places that are calling on you for healing. And we name some of them before you now that are known to us. And I invite those of you who are listening to lift up your prayer requests.
for Camille's mother to get an apartment and get the care she needs. Lord,
Lord,
hear our
hear our
prayer.
prayer. Prayers for Becky Blaylock,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for Ken and Lisa, Claire, Maya, and Lulu.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For traveling mercies.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Matt and Heather and their family.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Connie Grindle,
Lord, hear our prayer. For trans folks around the world.
Lord, hear our
Lord.
prayer. Prayers for peace in the hearts and minds of world leaders.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For all those struggling to make ends meet.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Zaida and Roberto Angeles, and for David Perucci.
Lord, hear our prayer. For the St. Junia community in these trying times.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the Burton family.
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, for all those that we've named and for those who remained unnamed, we give you thanks that you hear our prayers and that you answer. And we know that we can always pray the prayer that Jesus taught us, especially when our words fail us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come, and let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial, and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So I'm going to confess, this is one of my favorite stories about Jesus, in part because it gives us a glimpse into his hometown, and it's there's a movie I really like. It's an obscure movie from the 1950s, starring Jimmy Stewart as a sheriff, and it's called Fire Creek. And it came out during a time during the 1950s when there was kind of this nostalgia for small towns and for, the good hard the honesty and goodness of just common folk. And this is one of the most cynical, biting movies I've ever seen. In that the sheriff is really frustrated because this small town of people who talk a good game about their virtues won't step up. They won't resist the corruption and evil and the bullies, and he's kind of left alone to do it. And he feels kind of hung out to dry. Again, it's not a widely known Western, probably because of its pretty biting take during McCarthyism on the virtues of small town folks. Now, Jesus Jesus really rubbed elbows with common folks. He wasn't just hobnobbing with the wealthy elite, with the religious leaders. I mean, that was one of his appeals. But I find it interesting that Mark includes this story about how Jesus is rejected by his hometown. And there's some beautiful elements in this story that I want to lift up because I think they bear mentioning. Um, so he's already been on a tour. He starts off in Capernaum. Now, Capernaum is the place he made his home. It's on the north shore of Galilee. It was a more cosmopolitan city. It's up in Galilee, which was often referred to as Galilee of the Gentiles, because there was a lot of cultural mixing that went on up there. That's where Jesus starts his ministry. That's where guy gets lowered down through the roof and he heals him. That's where, he starts off his healing ministry, and then he's been across the lake. He's been over in Gentile territory. Again, casting out demons and healing people. And so he's already been on a tour. Word has already gotten back to his town that, hey, your boy's been doing some pretty amazing things out there. He comes back, and it's interesting. He starts teaching in the synagogue, and it says many who heard him were surprised. But then it immediately follows with just a series of questions. And now this is an interesting thing that the biblical authors do with language. If you see a series of questions or you see something repeated, it's telling you that there's something going on. And what you have here is just a series of questions, none of which are answered, right? But it starts off, where did this man get all this? So what's this wisdom he's been given? Now, this is not just an inquiry, like where did you come up with this? Or where did you get this? What's this wisdom you've been given? Wisdom in quotation marks, right? This is a profound skepticism. Um, it says, what about the powerful acts? So some translations say miracles. Powerful acts doesn't really convey it. The word here in Greek is like dunama, like dynamic, deeds of power. I mean, signs, miracles, boom, powerful things you've done. What about the dunama, the miracles that have been accomplished through him? Get a load of this, right? So there's this intense skepticism here. Then isn't this the carpenter? And you would expect if they say, isn't this the carpenter, Joseph's son? But that's not what they say. Isn't this the carpenter, Mary's son? Do you notice? They kind of write Joseph out of this picture. Aren't you supposed to be the son of a carpenter? Maybe your parentage is elsewhere. So there's a little bit of implied ribbing or elbowing. Now, Mark doesn't have any infancy narratives, right? He doesn't say anything about Jesus being born of the Holy Spirit or any miraculous stuff, but except for this one little piece. Isn't this the carpenter, Mary's son? There's something going on there. And the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon. We know your family. You ain't that big. Give me a break. Coming here putting on airs, telling us about all this stuff you've done. Oh yeah, big city boy, college boy, lots of learning, right? This is profound skepticism, and it's just question after question after question. And then it says I like the word that this translation uses. They were repulsed by him. So the word in Greek is scandalized. They were scandalized by him. So in other words, I mean, really biting, like, give me a break. What is this that you're coming in here with? I mean, it's really that kind of attitude. So Jesus's response, now he quotes a saying that was well known at the time. Prophets are honored everywhere except in their hometowns. That's where the usual saying ends. Jesus adds, and among their relatives, and in their own households. He's getting them really specific, right? Now, some of these problem people in the town are probably related to him. I mean, this is a small town. Like, he's probably related to some of these people. Aren't his sisters with us? This is, they name his brothers. So this is one of Joseph's boys, or this is one of Mary's kids, right? And so he's getting really specific. He uses this phrase, and he's really driving it home on them. Prophets are honored everywhere except in their hometowns. and in their own households and among their own relatives. He's basically saying this applies to y'all. And then the next sentence is he was unable to do any miracles there. Now, this one has always troubled me because and Mark does seem to have a theology that people's faith is part of the power that enables the miracles. Like Mark, I think generally believes that the faith is like the manna, the energy that God is using to do miracles. So I do think that's part of Mark's theology. That's never sat well with me because I don't think miracles depend on our faith. I just say that's a theological difference I have with Mark. But it's possible to read this sentence a little bit differently. He was unable to do any deeds of power there, except that he placed hands on a few sick people and healed them. He was appalled by and the word here is translated as disbelief, but it's apistuo. Pistuo means really means trust. And I really prefer thinking of this as a lack of trust rather than a lack of belief. Like it's not just that they don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God, or they believe certain doctrines about Jesus, or that even that he can do miracles. It's this profound skepticism. I think they're treating Jesus as though he is a con artist. Like this guy has shown up. He's grifting. He's working an angle. That's what I get from Nazareth, his hometown. It's not just that they don't believe he's a prophet. It's that they think he's got an angle. They do not trust him. Not that they just don't believe him. And that's why he can't do any miracles among them. They don't trust him. And I think in that kind of setting, I mean, if you think about it's not just that he doesn't have the power to do miracles, right? It's not just their lack of belief somehow saps him of his divine magical energy. It's that they don't trust him to do miracles. And if he does any, it's just going to make it worse. Do you hear the difference there? I don't think this is them sapping his divine power. I think it's Jesus going like, there's no point in doing miracles here. It's just going to make it worse. Deeds of power are going to backfire. He can't do anything. So the immediate next part here, I mean, this is in contrast to what immediately happens next, where Jesus sends out his disciples and he basically tells them, you go do all this stuff that I'm doing in other towns. But we've seen the best and we've seen the worst of people responding to Jesus by this point in Mark's story. And now he sends his disciples out and he gives them instructions. And I think it's significant. That's this little last piece here. If a place doesn't welcome you or listen to you as you leave, shake the dust off your feet as a witness against them. I think he's saying, look, you've seen what happened, right? This is what you do in that case. You just leave. Shake the dust off your feet. You don't throw your pearls among swine, essentially, is what Jesus is telling his disciples here. But I love this picture that we get of Jesus's ministry. It's not all flitting from one place to another, doing miracles and getting adulations and having people believe that he could do all the good things, but a lack of trust will make it difficult for some people to receive him. The reason this passage speaks so powerfully to me, and this is also why I love the fact that today was about the history lesson was also about Joan of Arc, and we've got the Mark Twain quote, is that we live in an age of profound mistrust, right? Of strong antipathy, of fear, and Jesus, Joan of Arc, other people who stand out as those who are going to act as though that's not the case, who are going to do what they can, do their best in spite of the distrust around them. That's really what speaks to me out of this passage, that Jesus does go to his hometown. He probably expected this reaction. He knew what they were like. I mean, you don't if I go to a small town, if you go to a small town in rural Alabama and you're from there, you can expect this kind of reaction. And yet he goes there anyway, right? He makes the effort. He makes the attempt. Um, anyway, that's what speaks to me out of this passage today. In an age of profound mistrust, um, what does it mean to be a prophet? What does it mean to speak for faith? Um, that's what I get out of this passage. Anyway, I would love to hear your responses. What spoke to you out of the passage?
I can't help but like, well, a couple of things. First, I can't help but think back to the passage about Jesus going to read in the synagogue, when he was a
Hmm.
child. Like,
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, did they just think he was like the brainy weirdo,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
like, you know, neurodivergent Jesus, I guess.
Or it's
Yeah,
fine for him to be a precocious kid, but when he comes
yeah,
back telling them, putting on
yeah.
airs, as it were,
Uh,
right?
and I think this when they talk about like not being able to do miracles, but he healed a few people. Like,
All right.
I think we're talking about the communal nature of
Mhm.
his like deeds of power. I think he
Mhm.
like starts movements where he goes.
Mhm.
He creates systems of support,
Mhm. Mhm.
that he leaves behind. And that's part of like why his ministry is so like subversive. But these people, they're not really willing to go there with him. They don't trust him. They don't maybe even trust each other. But
Right.
yeah, I think the miracle, I mean, in my mind, I think the miracle he can't do is, start a community of
Mhm.
people who are willing to like take care of each other while, after he leaves, you know,
Mm.
because they don't really think of him as, I don't know. Yeah, the trust is lacking.
Yeah. Well, and I think, when he goes to the synagogue, the setup is kind of like previous stories where he goes to the synagogue and there's a man with a withered hand and he heals the withered hand. And like that doesn't happen, but it almost feels like except he heals a few people, it feels like that's individual. Like maybe he goes to their homes but there's not a public, as you're saying, there's not a kind of a public communal, oh, wow, look at this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the way that people look at him, there's this, even because there's always marginal people wherever he goes, and we
Mhm.
know in his small town there's other marginal people. Maybe like those couple of people that got healed were like the ones who, they didn't care what the rest of the town thought, but everybody else was sort of like, well, I don't want to. I know this guy might be able to, help me, but
Hmm.
I don't want to like ruin my, I don't know, relationship
Yeah.
with the rest of the town.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, these are the small town dynamics. I mean, I feel like there's a lot that's not said in this
yeah.
story. Kind of like, you know what I'm talking about. You know?
Because like that's Mark though, isn't it?
Hmm.
He's the one
Yeah.
who's very like, I'm not gonna say anything extra.
Mm. Yeah, it's very
I'm just
spare.
gonna sort of newspaper beat like the
Hmm.
basics. Yeah,
Yeah. Very, very, very sparse in his details.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the way you're thinking, Miller. I want to highlight. We've had a little bit of a discussion going in the chat, right? And rather than just reading through it, I think maybe you just it's very much in line with what you're saying. I want to sort of deal with this question of what it means to say couldn't, because
Hmm.
we throw that around. Oh, there was a long line, I couldn't get in. Well, what you mean is you didn't wait long enough,
Hmm.
right? We use couldn't to mean it didn't happen,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I that's what I get here, right? Is that it's not actually about divine capacities. It's that there were no takers,
Oh, I
except
like
for
that.
a few exceptions, right?
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
more so he didn't get to perform any deeds of power because they didn't care to have him do any. Nobody came to him
Right.
except for a few people who he healed here and there quietly.
Yeah. I, I
Because his town is like, yeah, no, we don't need you. Again, like you're saying, Dave, city
Hmm.
boy, college boy. Oh yeah, you think you're big stuff walking around, and you're getting all kinds of attention in these other towns. We're gonna have to remind you where you're from. Make sure you don't get above your raising.
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. It
So
it
it's like
puts me
they don't let him be a prophet among them, right?
right.
They can turn that off by just being like, nope, don't see it, don't care.
I really like there were no takers. I mean, that really, yeah, it's like we don't really want you to do miracles here, right? I do feel like that's part of the angle. I'm what you said at the end, I'm not exactly sure. I can't remember the exact words. It puts me in the mind of when um when I have talked about um progressive Christian activity, prophetic activity, protesting and that kind of stuff to other people as like, well, look, this is the same kind of stuff that Martin Luther King Jr. did, right? And I'm referring to like precedent. I'm talking about precedent. So, this is MLK. This is St. Francis taking off his robe and walking naked out of the church. I mean, you know, this is prophetic action. And oftentimes the response is, you're comparing yourself to Martin Luther King Jr. or something like that, Like, like that's the response. Like, you're comparing yourself to a prophet? I mean, Jesus is like, this is the precedent. I'm trying to follow the precedent, right? And I'm thinking about, oh, I remember what it was. You saying like, I mean, just imagining saying Jesus thinks he's big stuff, you know?
I mean, so they're actually, this is dovetailing exactly with what
Yeah.
Miriam has put in the chat. Miriam says
Mm.
bewilderment might have been a factor. What? I wiped this kid's butt as a baby, and he ran with the rest of the snotty-nosed kids his age.
Yes.
Bewilderment would naturally lead to distrust in the small mind. I think
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's a
I
really
think,
important point. It was about these expectations,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
That like when people start getting alarmed about Jesus getting above his raising or whatever, they've got a box that people from their town are supposed to fit in, and it's this hierarchy thing of like, well, wait a minute, you're not supposed to tell me anything, I tell you things,
Right. Yes.
right? So there's
Hmm.
no expectation. Like, people are really really closed off from just sort of considering like fresh opportunities for growth, for
Hmm.
healing.
Hmm.
They're too attached to things being the way they always have been.
Yeah.
I also want
Yeah.
to like I have to circle back to like what Dave said about the like it's Mary's child.
Mm.
Like what do these people think about Jesus' parentage? Like because obviously it was, there was kind of a question mark, like
You can imagine
um
that, like, for
oh,
Mary,
she gave birth
this
early. No.
every time
Yeah.
somebody wants to get at her, they bring this crap up again, and it
Yeah.
drives her crazy.
Yeah. And that's a
It
small
can lie
town.
dormant for years, and then somebody's gonna be like, "Oh, isn't this Mary's son?" She's like, "No."
I think this is
Yeah.
a like I don't know, this sort of points to like what was Jesus' trauma, when he was
Yeah.
a kid. Like how do people treat him?
Yeah.
Obviously, there's stuff in like the Gospel of Thomas or whatever, but like this is like the very real, like you have to deal with this, like
Really specific, given the story and given
Yeah.
that people did not believe it.
Hmm.
yeah,
The topic of conversation, the, if you will, taking of bets
Hmm.
about who his real bio dad
yeah,
was
Hmm.
running in the background for decades,
Yeah.
yeah,
because
Yeah.
that
yeah,
is salacious small town gossip.
I,
yeah,
I I think you're right on. I mean, it I think it's fascinating, right? That Mark doesn't have an infancy narrative, doesn't have a miraculous birth story, and yet I mean, and maybe I'm reading into it. I mean, but people, if that's the case, then lots of other people have also looked at this going, isn't this interesting? This one little detail where it seems like they're referencing something salacious, you know?
yeah.
And I'm not arguing for the harmony of the gospels. I'm just saying it sounds a lot, you know, like what they would say in a small town exactly as you're saying. This has been in the background for decades. That little phrase, isn't this the carpenter,
Well,
Mary's son?
it's leverage, right?
Yeah.
It's the thing they can reach for when
Hmm.
they need it to keep him in his place.
Yeah. Yeah.
It also, I feel like it kind of explains why you see Mary sort of come back into the narrative later on. You
Mm.
know, like she decided to side with her son on this one. You
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
like
Yeah,
she could have just stayed in the small town and been like these other people, and maybe she was at one point. It's hard to tell.
it
Like,
is.
it doesn't say, well, but his mom was there. Like,
Yeah. Well, and just
but
and just yeah, just for reference, Mark kind of writes Mary out of the narrative, but in Luke and John and Matthew, she's with him to the end. But in Mark, it's almost I don't know if it's like deliberately he writes her out or if,
was it?
anyway, go ahead.
Sorry, was it one of the earlier ones? I can't remember
Yeah.
the exact order. Like, and we know that like the sort of immaculate conception narrative sort of
Hmm.
that comes in some of the later written gospels.
Well,
Right.
Immaculate Conception is Mary, not
Right.
Jesus. But
Right.
Right. No, I know.
But
Well,
the
okay,
divine,
but
yeah,
both. You know,
yeah,
he
yeah,
was
under both.
also
Right. Absolutely.
immaculately concepted.
Right. Well, exactly. And I mean, this is one of those things where the history gets a little bit tricky because, we don't know what Mark knew. Um, and again, as I said, we might be reading into it that there's something salacious here. It just that it fits the narrative so well, that I suspect that there was already a narrative in place and Mark just didn't feel like it was worth starting with.
well, think about this
Anyway.
too. So when they start rattling off the names of the siblings,
Hmm.
right? Maybe we all know and agree who those kids' dad is, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
they're
Oh,
it's a way of hammering the point home.
I that's an interest. I hadn't thought about that. You're right. Isn't it he Mary's son and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas he's the
Rattle
half
off all
brother.
these legitimate kids.
He's the half brother. He's the weird one.
Isn't he the half brother of?
I
Weird.
mean, we really do have to
Mm,
bring it back to like, why does it matter to them?
yeah,
They've seen what he's done elsewhere.
right.
This is not that he's coming back here after having done other stuff elsewhere, you
Yeah.
know, like having huge crowds and giant, movement. And they're the ones who are like, well, we know this about him.
Yeah.
Like who cares?
Yeah. I'm I'm reminded of the book Rocket Boys by Homer Hickam, who talks about the small t the I can't he talks about the gossip network, the backyard. Like something could happen. It's a beautiful telling, but something could happen in one part of town that he and his friends did, and before he rode his bike to the other side of the town, his mom would already know because of the gossip line that went along the back fence, the backyard fences. And it's like that baked in thing in small towns where like everybody knows everybody else's business. And just like you were saying, like there's the lore, there's the remember when decades earlier. Oh yeah, the connecting the dots that happens um in along that gossip corridor. Anyway, it really, yeah, that it's a great picture of small town life.
Well, and I think the thing that is really vividly brought home here is that mindset is actively circumscribing their
Mm,
possibilities,
hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, they are being kept from embracing a really powerful experience,
Hmm.
right? And they could be taking pride and satisfaction in Jesus and his career, right?
Hmm.
They could be proud of him that hey, we had a hand in raising this kid. Look how he
Yeah.
turned out. Look what he's doing. Look how God is using him.
Hmm.
But that's not appealing enough
Hmm.
compared to living in the mental, box that they've made for themselves.
Yeah. And
And
I
like, boy, that we see a lot of that, don't we?
absolutely.
I
I just want to tie back into what you said earlier, Rob, about the hierarchy. Like he's come outside the hierarchy, and the idea is like, no, we're going to put you back in your place. Don't forget your
Yeah.
place. Anyway, I'm sorry, Miller. Go ahead.
That's fine. Yeah, the I think as someone who has been rejected in their own home by
Hmm.
someone, I also feel like Jesus is using this opportunity. He probably knew it was going to happen if he went home. Um, the
Mm,
following this on with the lesson of just go as yourself to minister to these places, and if they don't
mm.
accept you for what you are, leave. You know, this is a message for people who minister and for people, you know, who get rejected for
Yeah.
being like fully themselves and fully, you
Hmm.
know, involved in the ministry. Yeah, I think
I I like your
yeah.
take that Jesus may have done this intentionally. I mean, it says I just now noticed. I mean, I kind of ran over the sentence. Jesus left that place and came to his hometown, period. His disciples followed him. Like, what if Jesus knew this was going to happen and said, okay, guys, come see how it's going to work?
It
You
was
know,
probably a topic of conversation, right? He's like, well, I guess I'm gonna have to go back to my hometown at some point. And they're like, oh yeah, it's gonna be great. Old home week, right? And he's like, no, no.
yeah,
It's gonna
yeah.
be trash. But we have
And
to
if
do it. Like, what do you mean it's gonna be trash? They're gonna love you. No, they're not.
and as a lesson, like if you think of these things
Mm-hmm.
in succession,
Mm-hmm.
he was planning to send them out on their own. Like, okay, you need a hard one.
Yeah.
You need to see
Yeah.
me fail. Not, I mean, fail strong,
Oh,
but
I
like,
love it.
yeah.
I
Reality check, expectations management. Yep.
I love that. No, I think you're right. Yeah. Let's like, yes, come watch me fail so you know how it's going to feel. And now I'm going to send you out. I think that may be accurate. I like that read. Absolutely. Um, someone,
Camille just said in the chat, never go back to your high school reunion if you've left home for the big city. Oh, it burns.
yeah, yeah. Mm. Yeah, I want to read her comment. I grew up on a farm 15 minutes out of town, but my family had been residents of the town for over 80 years. I couldn't get away with anything because everyone knew my family, and by the time I get home from school, mom knew everything I'd done that day. Exactly. Yeah. Um, yeah, I think this is a really interesting I think it's a really interesting story. I think it's a glimpse into in a way into the humanity of Jesus. You know, we can talk very loftily about incarnation, about the divine coming and taking up residence in, human flesh and human community and human systems. But then you realize that flesh has a history and that community may not be the most accepting, most open-minded. Um, yeah, incarnation means living with some of this stuff.
I mean, just for the sheer emotional heft of it. Like I'm really sitting with what Camille was saying about, you know, life on the farm and life in town, right?
Hmm.
And can't get away with anything. And then that whole not going back to your reunion. I mean, so again, Mark is a very sparse teller. Like, but now I'm just thinking like how long did Jesus hang out, in the hometown and give them
Hmm.
a chance? How painfully awkward was this for all of them
Yeah.
as he's trying to gauge like when do I leave? You know, I mean,
Hmm.
and honestly, because like mom is like, oh, don't go. I love it when you're home, right? And
Hmm.
he's just like, oh, God, I gotta get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
You think about the social events that aren't in the story, but
Mhm.
it's like, oh yes, the so and so's are going to have us over for dinner, and then it's like, oh god, that's going to
Yeah.
be agony, and they don't know how to talk to him, and he's trying to talk about what he was doing in this other town, and they don't want to hear it. They're just reminiscing about, do you remember when you ran through our house naked with poop on your butt, little boy?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just like,
And
so tell us about your career.
yeah, yeah, some condescending guy. Honestly, I'm thinking about the SNL sketch now about like the awful Thanksgiving that people were having, or Christmas, whatever it was. I think it was Thanksgiving. And like there's the guy with the red hat on there,
Yeah.
and they just start this whole thing about, you're racist against white people, and then mom's like, she is, and it's like, oh god, just
Oh
imagining
man.
all the peeling onion of awkwardness that, like, wow, I would watch this movie, like, Jesus's trip to his hometown.
Yeah.
It must have
Oh
been
yeah.
agony.
Well, and that it in a way it prefigures what's going to happen in Jerusalem, right? Which is a totally different. So big city, very cosmopolitan, and he still gets rejected. I mean, in a
Well, it
way,
was
it's like,
overrun by people from the sticks
well,
because of
that's
what was going on.
right. And they looked at him. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Like, you're one of them. You're one of the bumpkins, right? I mean, I realize that's in John, but still, that's the picture, right? Um, yeah, you're one of those people from Nazareth. Oh man.
I like what Aleem says. Um, Anytime a person goes away from those who know them, they can allow inner changes to manifest in their life. When they go back home, people know them as they were and often are unable to see and embrace their changes.
Hmm.
Includes family. With Jesus, the changes are so huge, it's amplified.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I like that. I think the challenge. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for Jesus. We sympathize with Jesus because he's the hero of the story. But I'm also thinking about like how do I leave room for people to be different? You know, um, for people I haven't seen in a while. Like I mean, there's still. I mean, one of the reasons I haven't been to reunions a whole lot is that I still remember bullies. I'm like, I'm sure they've matured past their 14 or 15-year-old self, but you know, it's just aversive, you know. But leaving the open the possibility for someone to actually be different, um, I think is difficult. And I think that's, Jesus goes to see them, even though, as I think you're right, he probably anticipates this. He still goes and makes the effort. It's kind of like, now that I think about it, that goes back to the Ezekiel passage, right? They may reject you, but they'll know a prophet's been there. Like, this is your job as a prophet is to go.
Yeah.
And
And he healed the people who would let him.
yeah, he healed those who would let him. Yeah. Sometimes it's not going to work out. You do what you can. I mean, I hate to sum it up into but I think I do think that's part of the message, You do what you can. It is what it is. Yeah.
It's powerful to observe that Jesus, in these
Yeah.
circumstances, at the end of the day, the best he can do is declare defeat. I mean,
Yeah.
there's what's that Captain Picard quote, right? Uh, you can do nothing wrong, make no mistakes, and still lose.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
That's life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I think you're right. I like that too. That's part of like even Jesus can't do some things if people won't let him, you know. And so and he says that, I mean, to his disciples too. Like, there's going to be places that don't accept you, and you have to shake the dust off your feet and move on. And that's still, I mean, it's just recognition that's hard, and it's going to happen, you know.
Well,
Um,
I'm also thinking about the desire to have had a different past, the desire to be accepted. It's hard to be
mhm,
rejected by your own people,
mhm,
right? You feel like you belong to a place, you're from there. Um,
mhm,
to come to terms with that, maybe not being true. Like, no, they don't want me.
mhm. Yeah.
That's You know,
It's
like
tough.
there, yeah, that's really, really hard.
Hmm.
I think it also on a in a broader sense points to like the the earthly side of having heaven on earth, you know? Like
Mm.
there some cooperation with
Yeah.
the people on the ground is required. It's
Yeah.
not just Jesus can't just like poof, wave a hand and everybody is like, oh, this is awesome. Yeah, woo.
Right.
So yeah, this is I mean this is what we're dealing with now with like climate change and you
Yeah.
know
I can't
political nonsense. Yeah.
I can't miracle people into a new way of trusting or believing. That's yeah. I think that also speaks to our, theory of salvation, right? Which is that it's I mean, yeah, I don't want to get into the whole elect and free will stuff right now, but um there's definitely a sense of like if someone doesn't cooperate, it's not going to happen, you know?
You know, you talk about not being able to compel people into a new way of trusting or a new way of believing.
Mm-hmm.
There's another one that I think
Mm-hmm.
is worth bringing up, is which is a new way of belonging. That
Mm,
goes back to the hierarchy and
mm-hmm.
the boxes and sort of the implicit class structure of the small town or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Miller was talking about. I mean, Jesus sort of as community organizer,
Mm-hmm.
is also summoning people into a different way of supporting each other and a different way of being a community and living differently. And we see all that come to enormous fruition in Acts, right?
Yes.
So we see the power of that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's an invitation people don't want either.
Yeah.
You're I mean, we're talking about how hard it is for people to leave space for, a person they knew years ago to change or to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, then how much more difficult is it for them to accept an invitation to grow from that person?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't want to be equal to the dogs they really enjoy kicking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Ooh, ooh.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're right. Um, yeah. Um, the idea is accepting this person. If we accept this person, then we also have to change. And we're not really interested in this story. We're not interested in that. Um, absolutely. Well, that feels like a good place to wrap up. Um, we're at let's see. I do want to say, Aleem, yeah, the never a prophet in their own land. Um, I'm not exactly sure how it is in the original. But but Jesus is quoting one, a prophet is honored everywhere except their hometown. And part of that is, I mean, again, if you just go back to the Hebrew Bible and you look at the prophets, they're always they're always like, why won't people listen to me? Why did you send me here? No one listens to me. And there's always something they're complaining about. God gives them an impossible message to an impossible people, and then they're frustrated because it won't work. I mean, that's the whole prophetic story in a nutshell. Um, One of my favorites, I don't know if it's Mike, someone goes to a prophet from Judah goes to Israel, and he meets one of the prophets for hire that the king has, and the prophet for hire says, "Go back to your own town to earn money." Right? I mean, basically he's saying, you can't be a prophet here. You need to go back to your own land and be a prophet. Anyway, um, you can't win.
I'm imagining like a very dejected Jesus leaving at the end of all this and saying, "Yeah, anybody can do miracles, but only a prophet can get kicked out of his hometown."
Yeah. That's a good that would be a good like frame as he's leaving. Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and move into our closing. I'm gonna go ahead and pull the liturgy up again. Here we go.
Our closing prayer comes from Queen Anne from the looks like probably the 17th century. Almighty and eternal God, the disposer of all the affairs of the world. There is not one circumstance so great as not to be subject to thy power, nor so small but it comes within thy care. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
So thanks so much for tuning in, those of you who are on streaming on Facebook or YouTube. Appreciate your presence with us today. Again, if you don't mind just clicking like or comment with where you're watching from to give us a way to count you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream. And those of you on Zoom, if you'd stick around for just a minute more.